All right, welcome back, guys. In the last video, we saw how to create our listing model, how to create the listing router, and then migrate everything to our listing database. Now, in this video, we're going to create the logic for registering an account and also retrieving the user data, and then we're going to test out our authentication-based endpoints. So that's going to be the goal for this video. So let's go ahead and get started on that. So right now I have my server and database both running, so go ahead and do the same. And then I'm just going to close this terminal up, and then I'm going to open up my user, and then views.py. So this is where I'm going to start working. I'm going to remove everything from here. And then I'm going to create a class, which I'm going to call register view. This is going to be a class-based view. And then I want to inherit API view. So I'm going to do from REST framework.views. I'm going to import API view. And then I'm going to pass that within here. And then remember that by default in our settings, so if I open that up, not that, but this, and then if I scroll down to my REST framework settings, so that's right over here, we have the default permission classes as is authenticated. But when you go to register an account, you're obviously not going to be authenticated. So we're going to have to also set the permissions of this to be allow any. So by knowing that, I'm going to import from REST framework. I'm going to import permissions. And then that way, I can pass this attribute of permission classes and set that to be permissions.allow any. And there we go. So now when we hit this endpoint, or I guess when we hit the endpoint that uses this view, then the permissions are going to be allow any instead of is authenticated. And then when we register for an account, I'm going to make this a post request. I'm going to pass itself and request in here. And then everything inside of this request, I'm just going to wrap in a try except. That way, if anything goes wrong, we can just return a response. So I'm also going to have to import response. So I'm going to do that right over here from REST framework.response. I'm going to import response. And then I'm going to go ahead and pass an error object in here. And it's just going to say something went wrong when registering an account. And then I'm also going to pass a status code. So I also have to import status, which is going to come from REST framework. So right after this permissions import, I'll also import status. And then I can set the status to be status.http 500 internal server error. And then I'm going to set it to be this because that means something went wrong with our code here on the endpoint. So it's not something that the client themselves did wrong. So that's why I'm going to have it a 500 status code. And then as for the logic, I want to retrieve some data. So I can do that with data is equal to request.data. So this request.data, I'm going to store inside of this variable data. And then this here is going to be a dictionary. So then I can retrieve the different values that we expect from here. So remember when we register an account, what we require is the name, because in our custom user model, we set this to be required. So I'm going to retrieve that from data name. We also need the email. So that's going to be coming from data email is where I expect to get that from. And we're going to have the password, which is going to be data password. Now I also want to have some additional fields here as well. So one of which is going to be this repassword, which is going to come from data repassword. And this is just going to make it so that the password and repassword, we're going to make it so they have to match. So that way it's a way to confirm that the user typed in the password correctly. And then another field I'm going to have is an is realtor. So I'm going to have data is realtor, where this is coming from. And then this way you can imagine, you can either have one sign up page where maybe someone has some kind of checkbox that they select where it's like I'm signing up to be a realtor or I'm signing up to be a normal user, or you can even have something like two separate sign up pages where one is for normal users, one is for realtor users. So that's a sort of way that you can imagine how this application would work. And then that would hit this sort of endpoint here for registering an account. So either as a normal user or a realtor user, and this right here would determine which account they're signing up for. Now, when this is realtor piece of data is passed in here, it's going to be a string. So one thing I want to do is check if is realtor is equal to the string true. Then I'm going to set is realtor to be the Boolean value true. And then otherwise, I'm going to set is realtor to be the Boolean value false. So if this is true, then we're going to set that is realtor flag in the custom user model to be true, which is going to distinguish this user to be a realtor. Otherwise, it's going to be false, meaning that they're a normal user. And then after that, I'm going to check if the passwords match. So I can do that with a simple check of if password is equal to repassword. If that's the case, we're going to continue on with the request. If it's not the case, we're going to return an error response. So I'm going to return a response. It's going to have an error object. Also, let me close that side window. There we go. And then this right here is going to say passwords do not match. And then for this, I'm going to have a status code of status.http 400 bad request. And then if the passwords do match, we're going to continue on. And then my next check is going to see, is the password greater than or equal to 8 characters in length? So they require to have a password of at least 8 characters. So I'm going to check if length of password is greater than or equal to 8. So we're going to continue on. Otherwise, once again, we're going to return an error response. And then this error response is also going to be a 400 bad request. So to make this easier, I'm just going to copy this one, put it in here, fix up the indenting, and then just change this text. And then in this case, I'll just say password must be at least 8 characters in length, something like that. And then if this check passes, then we're going to continue on with this request. So the next thing I want to make sure is that there isn't a user with the email that's being passed right here. And then another good thing to do is also put this into lowercase when I do this comparison. So I'm going to do email is equal to email.lower. That way I just make sure that everything's in lowercase in this email. And then I'm going to continue on here. So I'm going to check if user.objects.filter, where email equals email dot exists. And then I want to make sure that this email does not exist, because that's going to mean that we're going to continue on with this request. Otherwise, we're going to return an error that's like, there's already a user with this email. And then I also have to make sure I bring in this user model. So the way that we can bring in a user model when we're dealing with a custom user model is we can do from django.contrib.auth. I can import get user model. And then I can do user is equal to get user model and call that. And then that way we can have a reference to this user model, which is going to be our custom user model. So now I'm going to go ahead and handle this else case, which means that there's already a user with this email address. So this is again going to be a 400 bad request. So to make this easier, I'm going to copy this, paste it into here, fix up the indenting, and then just change up this message so it makes sense. So I'll do something like user with this email already exists. And then if this isn't the case, then we're going to create this user. Now, we have one separate function for creating a normal user and one separate function for creating our Realtor user. So just to remind you, in this user models.py, so right here, we have this create user. This is what we're going to call to create our normal user. This create Realtor is what we're going to use to create our Realtor user. So in these views.py, what we need to do now is check if not is Realtor. If that's the case, I'm going to create my normal user. So if they're not the Realtor, we're going to create the normal user. Otherwise, we're going to create the Realtor user. So let's start with the normal user. So I can create that with user.objects.create_user, because that's the name of our function in this custom user model right here. And then the fields that this requires is the name. So I'm going to do name equals name. It requires the email, so email equals email. And then it requires the password. So password equals password. So we're going to pass all this data onto here. So we're going to grab the email, the name, the password. We're going to normalize the email, make sure it's lowercase. Then we're going to create this. We're going to hash the password, and we're going to save this user model in the database. And then, of course, our router is going to route this to be stored inside of our user database specifically. So then back in here, what I need to do is after we create this, just return a success response, just so that the user knows everything was okay. So I'm going to return a response. It's just going to have a success, and it's going to say user created successfully. And then I'll have a status, which will set the status.http 201 created, because we just created data in our database. And then if we hit this else, then instead we're going to create our Realtor. So I can do that with user.objects.createRealtor, because that's what we called it inside of here, create Realtor. And then again, we pass the name, email, password, so same data as previously. So I'm going to do name is name, email is email, and password is password. And then after that, we're going to once again send back a success response, just like we did previously. So I'm going to copy paste it here. And then instead of saying user created successfully, I'll just say something like Realtor account created successfully. That way we can tell the difference between whether we created a normal user or a Realtor user when we're hitting this endpoint. So there we are. This is our full logic now in place for registering an account. So now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, right below here, create our next class-based view. And this is going to be for retrieving our user data. So I'm going to create a new class-based view, which I'm going to call retrieve user view, pass in the API view to inherit that. And then this is going to be a GET request because we're getting the user data, pass in self, request, format none. And then once again, I'm going to wrap everything in a try except in case if something goes wrong during this request. I'm going to copy this error response, paste it in here to make this easier. And then I'm just going to change up this message. So I'm going to say something went wrong when retrieving user details, something like that. And then in this try part is where I'm going to retrieve the user. So I'm going to do user is request.user. And then I need to serialize this data. And then that way I can pass it back in the response. So to do that, inside of this user, I'm going to create a file which I call serializers.py. And then in here, I'm going to create my user serializer. So to accomplish that, I'm going to import from Rest Framework serializers. Then I'm going to create this class, which I'm going to call user serializer. So I'm going to use to serialize the user data. I'm going to pass in serializers.model serializer so I can inherit that. And then I'm going to have a class of meta in here, where I set the model equal to the user model. So we have to make sure we bring in the user model. So this is something we did previously inside of this view. So I can just copy what I did here, just so I don't have to retype this. Then I can go back here, paste it in here, and then I'm going to assign the model to be the user. And then I'm going to set the fields to be this tuple, where the things I'm going to serialize are going to be the name, the email, and say the is Realtor field. So everything else I don't want serialized. So things like the password I don't want serialized and so forth. I just want these things to be serialized, and that's what I'm going to pass back as the user data. So now back in my views, I can go back down here, and then I can serialize this. Actually, I also have to make sure I import that user serializer first off. So I'll do that, say, right here. So I'm going to do from.serializers. I'm going to import my user serializer, and then I can utilize this. So back down here, I can do user is user serializer, and then pass in my user. So we're going to serialize this user right over here, and we're going to reassign it in this user variable, and then we're going to pass back a response with this user data. So we can do that with return a response, and then I'm going to have this be user, and that's going to be user.data is how we can retrieve that serialized data. And then I'm going to return a status, which is going to be status.http 200 OK. And then by default, these responses return a 200 OK, but I like to be explicit with these, so I pass it in here anyway. So now that we have our two class-based views, the next step is going to be to create our URL endpoints that we're going to hit, which are going to use these two class-based views. So inside of this user, I'm going to create a urls.py file, and then inside of here, I'm going to create those URL endpoints. So first off, I need to import from Django.urls. I'm going to import path, so this is how I can create those API endpoints, and then also have to bring in those two views I made. So from .views, I can import, I can either do a star or I can just bring them in manually like register view and retrieve user view, and that's the way I like to do it, so that's what I'm going to do. Then I'm going to define this URL patterns and make sure to spell this correctly. And then this is going to be a list with two paths. One is going to be for my register, which is going to use my register view, and then I have to chain on this .as view because it's a class-based view. Then I'm also going to have one for retrieving my user. So I'm going to have retrieve user view. I'm going to save this, then I'm going to open up my core urls.py. So it's going to be my project level urls.py. And then inside of here, I'm going to create an endpoint. So I'm going to do path. And then for this, I'm going to do something like auth/user/. And then I'm going to include, and then in quotes, I'm going to do user.urls. Then I also have to make sure that I import include so I can use it. So right in here, I'm going to do include. So this is coming from Django.urls. So now what's going to happen is whenever I hit auth/user/, we're going to extend these URLs off to the user URLs. So that's going to be this file right here. And then to register, I think a good endpoint would be something like auth/user/register. So here I'm going to pass in register. Then for retrieving a user, we can do auth/user/, and you can do something like retrieve or get user, but I'm just going to do me. I think that's maybe a good endpoint name. So that's what I'm going to use. So it's going to be auth/user/me. So when we hit that endpoint as a GET request, we're going to go ahead and utilize the logic in this retrieve user view, and it's going to give us back a response with the user data. And then when we hit auth/user/register, then we're going to hit this right here. When we hit that specifically with a post request, then inside of this register view, we're going to go into that post method and then hit all that logic, which is going to create either our normal user or our Realtor user. So there we are. We have everything now in place. So let's make sure everything's good. Looks like it is. So the final step is to test out these endpoints. So we're going to test out registering our account. And then also we're going to test out some of these other endpoints here, because this one specifically is going to be what we use to log in. These other two aren't as important in this application, but they're also views that you typically use with JSON Web Token authentication, so I might as well also test them out as well. So what you're going to want to do is open up Postman, make sure that your server is running. I'm going to create a brand new collection. So I can create a new collection by either clicking this new and then collection, or I can click this plus here, and then I can put in the collection name. So for the collection name, I'm going to do listings with a Z because that's the name of this application. And then all of my endpoints I'm going to store inside of this folder. So first off, let's try to create an account. So we're going to hit HTTP localhost 8000/auth/user/register. So this is going to be my endpoint. This has to be a post request. So I'm going to save this. This is going to be register account. And I'm going to store that inside of this listings collection. So I'm going to save that. And if we just send this off as is, something went wrong when registering account because we have to pass that data. Now, another thing you could do is inside of the register view, you can make sure that each of these pieces of data are passed. So you can wrap each of these into try except and return a specific response, like the name wasn't passed in here or the email wasn't passed in here, but I'm not going to go that far. But that's something you can always do to have an even more specific message other than just this 500 internal server error. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead inside of these headers, pass a content type of application JSON. I'm going to go into this body, pass in some raw JSON data. And then the things I have to pass is the name, which I'm going to do something like John Doe. And then I'm going to have the email, which is going to be johndoe@gmail.com. And then I'm going to have the password, which I'm going to set to password. And then I'm going to have the repassword, which I'm going to set to something like pass. So I'm first going to test out if they don't match. That's going to be the first error. Then I also have to pass in this is Realtor. And then for this John Doe account, I'm going to have it be false. So this account here is not going to be a Realtor. So actually what I can also do is I can rename this to be register normal account. And then I can go ahead, click this, and then do a duplicate. And then this one here, I'm going to do specifically for the Realtor account. So I'm going to do register Realtor account. So that way I can just jump back and forth between these if I want to create these different accounts instead of going inside of the data and then specifically changing it to be the correct user. So this is just going to make it a lot easier. So now this is all the data that I need to pass. So specifically here, I'm going to deal with the normal user. Later, we're going to go to this register Realtor. So for now, let's send this off. So passwords do not match. Good. We hit the first check. Now, if I have something like pass and pass, they're going to match. So we should hit that next check. So passwords must be at least 8 characters in length. So good. And then I'm going to make these actually match. Send this off. User created successfully. So this is the message for our normal user. Because remember, we have these two different responses, which help us distinguish that we hit the correct logic here. So this one's going to be for the normal user. So back in here, if I send this off one more time, we're going to also see user with this email already exists. All right, so good. We managed to hit all of our different edge cases and everything worked appropriately. So we're done with this registering a normal account. So I can do the register Realtor account. So I can set this to true. And then if I do something like this right here, where I have the passwords matched, they're 8 characters, and I save, if I send this off right now, we're going to have user with this email already exists. So the Realtor email can't be the same as a normal user's email. It has to be completely unique. So instead, I'm going to have something like Bob Smith, let's say. And then for the name, I'm also going to have Bob Smith. And then it's going to have the same password. And this is going to be a Realtor account. So once again, I can test out all those different edge cases, but we already tested that right over here. So I don't have to test that again. So I'm just going to have it like this, send off this request. And there we go. Realtor account created successfully. So perfect. Now, one thing I want to point out. So this retrieve user view, here we don't have the permission classes as allow any. So we have to be authenticated to hit this. So let's see how we can hit that. So first of all, we have to retrieve an access token. So I'm going to create a brand new endpoint. And then this endpoint is going to be for retrieving that access and refresh token. So what we have to hit, if we check out this urls.py, it's going to be API/token/. This is going to use that token obtained pair view. Then we have to pass in the correct data, which is the email and the password. So this has to be a post request. So it's going to go to localhost 8000 API/token/. I'm going to pass in some headers where I'm going to have content type. It's going to be application, JSON. And then inside of the body, I'm going to pass some raw data. And here, I'm going to have the email. And then I'm also going to have the password. So for the email, I can have johndoe@gmail.com. And then I can have the password. So this right here is going to log in my normal user because once again, in this register normal view, we use this John Doe email. So I'm going to save this one, and then I'm going to name this something like login for normal user. I'm going to save that. And then I'm also going to duplicate this. Then for this one here, I'm going to rename it to be login for Realtor user. So for this one here, the only difference is going to be that this email is going to be Bob Smith. So what happens when we hit this endpoint here, our access token is going to be one that's for a normal account, whereas for this here, our access token is going to be one for a Realtor account. So first, let's start off with this one here. So if I do something like password123, save that, send it off, no active account found with given credentials. So these credentials have to be correct. So if I pass in the correct email and password, save and send that off, there we go. We get a refresh and an access token. And then I can do the same thing with this request here as well. I can send that off. And now we get the refresh and access token for this user here. So now let's go ahead and test out our endpoint for retrieving the user data. This is going to be a GET request. It's going to go to localhost 8000. And then it's going to be auth user me because that's what we defined it as. Then in the headers, the only thing I have to pass here is an authorization header. So first, let me go ahead and save this. And I'm going to save this as retrieve user. Save that. If I send this off without an authorization header, we get this authentication credentials were not provided, and we get this 401 unauthorized because we have to be logged in. So what I can do is I can pass an authorization header. This is going to be a bearer token. And then here, after this bearer, I can pass in the access token. So if I grab the access token for this normal user, so that's going to be this right here. If I copy that, go back to my retrieve user, then after this bearer, I paste that in here, save, and send that off. And then also accidentally didn't notice I was doing this in the query parameters, so let me actually delete this. Go into my headers, my bad. So authorization, then pass in bearer, and then paste that in, so there we go. And now if I send this off, there we go. We get the user details with the name, the email, and the is Realtor. So all this data is correct. So now let's grab the access token for this Realtor account. So now instead, I'm going to copy this access token. I'm going to go back to this. And then instead of this access token, I'm going to delete it and paste the one that I just copied. So now if I send this off, we should get our Realtor user data. And there we go. We get our Bob Smith with the email and the is Realtor as true. And then of course we're getting the name, the email, and is Realtor because inside of our serializer, that's here what we defined to be the data that we serialize and send back. So that's the only data we retrieve. And then if we want more data, like say the ID, then we could also define that. So now if I send that off, now you get the ID as well. But the only thing I want is the name, email, and is Realtor. So that's all I'm going to pass in here. So we're almost there. We only have 2 more endpoints now to hit. So that's going to be our refresh endpoint and then also our verify endpoint. So our refresh endpoint's going to be this right here. So I'm just going to copy this ahead of time. So API token refresh / and then our next one's going to be the verify. So let's just test out those 2 real quick. So our refresh is going to be a post request. And then I'm going to pass in headers where I have the content type of application JSON. And then I'm going to pass some raw data to this where I have a token. And this right here is going to be a refresh token. And then the endpoint's going to be localhost 8000 / this should be a / and then API token refresh. So now I need to grab the refresh token. I'll do it for, say, the normal user. So I'm going to grab this refresh token, copy that, paste it into here, save, and this is going to be refresh token. Send that off. Oh yeah, and then this should actually be called refresh, not token. So I'm going to save that, send it off. There we go. We get back a new access token. So I believe for the verify endpoint, you have to call it token. So I had that a little mixed up. But anyway, let's go ahead, hit our verify endpoint now, just to test that out as well. It's going to be HTTP, localhost 8000, API token, verify / and then again I'm going to have content type here of application JSON. I'm going to have a body with raw data, and then here's where I'm going to have that token And then in here, I pass an access token. So what I can do is I can go to this refresh where we got back this new access token. I can just grab this one, copy it, go back here, paste, and then save this. This will be the verified token. I'm going to save that, send off this request as a post request. All right, so it looks like something went wrong with this request. Let's check out what happened. So attribute error, type object, blacklist token, has no attribute objects. Okay, so I believe I have to go into my settings. And then inside of the simple JWT setting, I'm going to add another setting in here. I'm going to set rotate, refresh, tokens as false. I'm going to save that. Then I'm going to go back in here and try this once again. Actually, let me hit this here, send this off, grab this access token, and then try to pass that in the body. And then send that off. So we're still getting that error. All right, so I'm going to pass another setting to this actually. So I'll do blacklist after rotation, also false. Save that. Let's try this again. Okay, there we go. Now the verify works. So we also have to make sure we pass in these two additional settings. So make sure that the rotate refresh tokens is false, as well as the blacklist after rotation. Now, I thought these would be false by default, but looks like we have to explicitly define them here. So make sure you have that if you get that issue. Then that way you have the verify working correctly. And then I can also go into this login for Realtor, grab this access token here, and then also test this one out. So I'm going to go to this verify view, paste it into here, save, and send that off. And there we go. We get an empty object passed back with a 200 OK. That means that it was verified successfully. So that's how you determine whether this endpoint was successful. So there we go. Now we hit every single one of our authentication-based endpoints. Now we're not really going to be using things like the refresh and verify, but I just wanted to include them here just to make this a little bit more complete. But anyway, I'm just going to close all of these up. So now we're all done with what I wanted to cover in this video. So we managed to implement the views and endpoints that allow us to register an account, retrieve a user. Then we tested every single one of our authentication-based endpoints. And then in the next video, we're going to see how we can send off requests to retrieve listings and also a listing detail. But anyway, this video, I covered everything I wanted to. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you haven't yet, please hit that like button. It goes a long way to help a channel like mine grow and get recognized so others can benefit from the videos I release as well. Also, I have links in the description that you can check out. I have one for an e-commerce course that you can check out if you're interested in learning to develop an application like that. I also have a link for joining my Web Development Kings Facebook group. That way, if you want to personally ask me something, then you can go right ahead and do that, and I'll happily help you out. It doesn't cost you anything, so if you're scratching your head about something, then you can go right ahead and ask me to help you out. Only questions I probably won't answer are if you want me to help you build some kind of personal project, as I don't quite have the time for that sort of thing, but anything else is fair game. You can also post something in the group itself. That way, other developers in the group can help you out with something as well. The group is all about growing your expertise as a developer, so if you're interested in that, then go right ahead and click that link in the description and join the family. Also, if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button, turn on those notification bells, that way you don't miss out when I release a new video, and I'll see you in the next one.